So I just wanted to make a very quick, admittedly kind of half-assed little video on the new BLOOD release. But hey, I tried, and I don't really have much free time on my hands, so whatever. Also, sorry in advance, I'm sick and my voice sucks and it pains me to talk, but deal with it, or whatever, because I'm really excited to make this video. Also, sorry if you see some really bad performance drops in the video. For whatever reason, whenever I record anything on this PC now, the video slows down at certain points. Though in-game it's perfectly fine, so I don't know what the hell it is. So yeah, basically this is just a full, proper Windows overhaul of the classic BLOOD release with its expansions, properly titled 1 Unit Whole Blood. By the way, please wait till the very end of the video to hear anything that I have to say about this. If you're either curious about picking it up or you're interested in the changes or whatever, everything I'm about to say in this video is based off my own personal experiences and thoughts, so if you don't agree, sorry, deal with it. But yeah, I actually have a pretty big history with this game. BLOOD was the first game I ever made a review on, and while I tried to be somewhat critical of it at the time, I'm gonna come out of the water, or bloodshed in this case, and admit that BLOOD on its own is my favorite game of all frickin' time. If you know me personally, it's always a very hard three-way tie between the original Doom, Quake, and BLOOD. But my heart really lies with BLOOD more than the others. It's darker, it's gorier, it's got more dark humor, it's tougher, it's got a little more nostalgic value to me too, even though that doesn't really matter much in this case since all three of them do. And it's just something that can't really be topped in my opinion. It's so good, it's pretty much perfect game. I have nothing to really complain about it, personally. There's just something so grabbing and so indescribably satisfying about the dark and violent nature of this game. And I really can't ever get enough of it. I've finished the game countless times and managed to go back every few months without feeling bored at all. The only other games I can do that with are the Doom games, Quake games, and Jazz Jackrabbit games. And maybe Captain Claw. That's another one of Monolith's other juggernauts of a game. So originally, BLOOD started development with the infamous 3D Realms, or Apogee Software, and then shifted development to the then brand new Monolith Productions. And it was eventually finished by them and published by GT Interactive in 1997. Followed by two expansion packs, the first one titled the Plasma Pack, and the second one titled the Cryptic Passage. Both of which, as I said earlier, were bundled together and released in a giant box called 1 Unit Whole Blood. This bundle was the same DOSBox version previously released on Steam and GOG. If you know who Samuel Valerio is, or Kaiser, he has reverse engineered a handful of old games to give them a proper remaster and source port, like Turok, Turok 2, Doom 64, Forsaken, and now BLOOD. And apparently he's working on Power Slave EX as we speak, which was out for a short time and then shortly taken down, most likely because Night Dive has acquired the rights. If you've played BLOOD before or seen my old review of it, you'd know that for the last almost 20 years, it was only officially released with DOS support. As you probably know, emulating DOS games is not always perfect, regardless of the hardware you have. Nothing will ever come close to how a game plays on original hardware, and this goes for emulating console games or DOS games or anything. There have been fan-made source ports for BLOOD like cross-matching in BLOOD GDX, which were decent where it mattered, but admittedly they weren't that great. Cross-matching was all good and fun until you realized the dynamite physics felt like shit.
Open for business.
And GDX had issues with more than 4 people on a multiplayer server, as well as some annoying input lag issues with the controls in general, which is definitely not something you want. Not that long ago, I think in like February or something, a fan port called NBlood came out, and it was what I felt like was the best one out there. The responsiveness was perfect, the physics and everything felt great, and it literally felt like the good old original DOS version on period-specific hardware. But the only issue that I had with it personally was getting multiplayer to work. So it was a nearly perfect and flawless port had that been fixed. Then, out of nowhere, this glorious bastard comes along. Night Dive teased the shit out of this release by updating their Facebook cover photo with a tiny blood driplet, making it more and more every day. Everyone knew that this was teasing blood since it was the same blood drop on the box art of the shareware version of the original game. But there was very little info around its release, so it kept everyone wondering when the hell it was finally going to come out. And sure enough, just a few days ago, it did. I'm also not entirely sure why this re-release is titled Fresh Supply, but it's likely to tie in with the other pun titles, so I guess. Okay, so now you know how I feel about Blood and where this version came from if you didn't already. So what's the difference between this remastered version and the original? Well, first things first, this is the only officially released version of a Windows Blood port, which is awesome in its own right. I'm really happy to say that the game performs just as good here as the DOS version on original hardware. The controls are extremely responsive and fluid, and you always feel like you're in control of Caleb, the main character. Unlike how it does in DOSBox or even some of the source ports where there will be some small input delay. The obvious difference everyone always thinks about in remasters or re-releases or whatever are the graphics, which are not that important to me. At least with this game, the performance has always been a big issue or ongoing issue between all of the source ports and the functionality. So yeah, it works good in here. The graphics are obviously a lot better, but they don't look too far off from the original DOS version. They feel more like they're high quality and they're like a more higher resolution version of the original textures, not like a completely remade thing. This is a good thing to me because while it does look improved, it doesn't take anything away from the style, look, or feel of the original. It just takes what was there and makes it better, which is something that I was really happy about. Rendering is also pretty great. Not only do you get the expected OpenGL or DirectX, but you also get Vulkan support. Yeah, Vulkan support for Blood, which is just insane if you ask me. There's lots of options to customize if you like, but at the end of the day, it doesn't look too far from the original. It's a blessing to some and it's a curse to others, but I really believe it's a good thing that they kept it feeling close to the original. Something new they added was a weapon wheel, which feels much more in place in a game like Turok, and very out of place for a game like Blood. But that can be easily turned off if you don't like it, so there's no real harm done there. Though, this is actually a much better option if you're playing with a controller, which you really shouldn't be doing unless you're playing as a second player on a split screen. And yes, there is split screen, I'll get to that too shortly. But if you do that and play it on a controller, it's useful because you're not able to quickly swap the weapons like you are on the keyboard, so you can at least get to see some of the other weapons you have to quickly switch them if you need to. I only kept it in for the duration of this review even though I played it with the keyboard. Also, power-ups now have a timer in the corner of the screen, which isn't necessary, but it's definitely a helpful little touch, and now you can see how much longer you'll have an item for. Also, you finally have proper mouse aiming. If you aren't familiar with the Build Engine games, they were all some of the earliest FPS games to allow up and down aiming, but they weren't enabled by default and instead had vertical auto aiming enabled like the earlier Doom Engine games. If you were to look up and down in one of these Build Engine games, it would feel very awkward with the mouse, and it would create this horrid, almost nauseating effect that wraps the image around the screen or something. I don't even know if I explained that right, but just look at this. Yeah, it's terrible. And this is why I've never gotten used to having vertical aiming enabled when I play Build Engine games. Thankfully, this port fixes that too when you have this 3D aiming option selected. So now if you want to, you have full proper mouse look aiming, and this alone is enough of a reason that you should get this. Another thing that I personally really liked about this was that just like all of the other games that Kaiser has reverse engineered and remastered or whatever, this one also wasn't made on the Build Engine. I mean, Blood was, but this remaster was reverse engineered and created on something called the RDR.EXE engine, which was used for RDR.EXE and probably being used right now for Power Slave and pretty much all of his stuff. So because of this, there's more voxels, like these metal cans for example, or these tables. I don't know, I love voxels so much. They've always been really interesting to me as a designer, since they're kind of complex to make and they take a very specific skill set to be able to make them. They also kept the cutscenes and everything in the game as well, and they look to be about the same, but they're actually a little lower quality than the originals for whatever reason, which is kind of weird. Probably due to the swapped file format. I don't know. Didn't bother me too much though, since the cutscenes always looked pretty ugly and dated. Speaking of which, custom content is easily accessible in here, and you can load fan-made mods from Classic Blood without any real hassle. But the file format for the cutscenes are different, so now they won't work, and they'll need to be changed. Not too big of a deal, but it's definitely something notable. As far as the sound and music, Fresh Supply uses the MIDI music but changes them slightly, and just like the graphics, this makes them slightly better but without taking away from the style, tone, or feel of the original, and it's totally welcome in my book. If you don't like it, you can always change it back to the original, just like you can with the graphics, and you can also put a CD in for CD audio music if you'd like. The sound on its own is practically the same. Another feature that was added and largely needed was the inclusion of quick saving. Yes, there's finally an option to quick save. In the original, you had to manually save, and you still can, but if you press the F2 and the F3 keys, you can quick save and quick load, which is a lifesaver for a game as challenging as this one, especially on higher difficulties. Oh yeah, speaking of that, they also added the ability to customize your own difficulty to suit your own specific playstyle, and this is something that I feel will help probably bring more people into the game. Most people will say that Blood is a batshit insanely difficult game even on the middle setting, and is unbalanced on the harder two difficulties, and while I don't necessarily agree with that, it's not something that really needs to be worried about anymore. Want to have more enemies but have them deal less damage? Go for it. Want to have less enemies but make them more powerful? Or are you just some sadistic bastard that wants to have the most enemies, full damage, and let them all respawn throughout the map? Well, you're free to do all of that exactly how you want it. And for a game like this, it's a really great and useful feature. Apparently you can also do this in Blood GDX 2, though I haven't tried it personally, so if you'd rather go for that, more power to you. The last thing I want to talk about is the multiplayer. They somehow managed to add split-screen multiplayer, which is just awesome if you remember how much fun games were playing with a friend in the same room as you, cause, you know, that's pretty rare nowadays. This is one of those rare moments when I'm probably the same age as you, but I go and whip out my old grandpa cane anyways and say, "Back in my day, we had this." Split-screen multiplayer. It's gone. Well, it's not gone, but it's really rare. Split-screen multiplayer is not something you see in really anything anymore, and it's really sad because that was probably the best way to play a game with a friend. And it's just absolutely insane that you can do this with 8 people at the same time. I don't know why you would do 8-player split screen on a computer, But I guess Night Dive was just saying, hey, screw it, let's add this feature in there, because why not?
The Festival of Blood continues!
Thankfully, there's no lag or delay issues anywhere, and it works pretty well. There's a capture the flag mode, which if I recall is only exclusive to this version, as well as co-op and deathmatch, or as it's called in Blood, Bloodbath, both of which have been in Blood since good old 97. The main thing I was wondering was if this release would fix the issue with multiplayer online. And it does. Thank God. The netcode has been redone entirely to fully and properly support 8-player multiplayer now. The first aside from the original DOS version to support more than 4 people without it lagging to hell, as well as the ability to host your own actual servers without configuring any of that other port forwarding crap or whatever. I've tried doing this with NBlood and GDX, and for the life of me, I could not be able to host a game at all. No matter how much I've tried, I've spent days, I've spent weeks trying to do it. I've had people in the community try to help me out, and for whatever reason, I just could not do it. But thankfully, now I can actually host servers. It's amazing. Although you can't customize the name or anything, and instead it'll just say your username's server whenever it shows up, it's a huge godsend compared to NBlood or GDX, where you had to do a bunch of unnecessarily complicated stuff to be able to play online. Though, take this as a little warning. I've seen many people saying you're required to have the specific client installed, or else the multiplayer will not work. I have GOG Galaxy installed because, honestly, I really love GOG and I firmly believe they do a great job updating their games and getting them to work on newer OS. Unlike Steam, which just releases them as fresh installs from the disks without patching them or updating them at all. So if you don't have GOG Galaxy, then I say it's probably the only worthy client that you should have on your PC. The only reason I'd recommend Steam is for the social aspect, but I'm starting to get a little off topic, so whatever. Moving forward, whether you get the game on GOG or Steam, make sure you have either of the clients installed if you want the multiplayer to work as intended. Well, RetroDeath, you didn't talk about the negatives. Are you some sort of night dive dick diver or something? No, I'm not. I do appreciate what they've done here, and I love this port as well as their other re-releases, but it's not 100% perfect. Not this one at least. I would say aside from some little bugs here and there that don't truly affect the gameplay, there's very few legitimately noteworthy negatives to this version that they are more than capable of fixing in the near future. Them being, the fact that you need a game client of either Galaxy or Steam to play multiplayer at all. Even though I can understand why they used it, this kind of defeats the point of trying to make GOG a 100% DRM-free platform. And I know some other games on GOG are starting to do this. I mean, it's not a huge deal to me since I love GOG Galaxy, but this kind of comes off as hypocritical. Also, the dynamite feels perfectly fine, thankfully. But for some reason the physics act a little weird. All the weapons deal the same damage as they do in the DOS version, but part of the fun of using the dynamite was that the enemies would go flying back in absolutely ridiculous ways. Take this for example. In the original DOS version, it works like this, as opposed to this in Fresh Supply. It's noticeable. It's not a deal breaker or something that pissed me off, but something that's definitely worth noting and something that needs to be fixed. And lastly, there's this weird issue with the sound that makes things rooms away sound like they're right in front of you or right next to you or something. This can be really off-putting, and this is probably the only issue that did legitimately annoy me. Though I know it's something that can easily be fixed, so it's really whatever. While at first glance it didn't seem like there was that much changed, there was actually a lot of stuff changed with this port, and I personally think that it's a great source port and it's totally worth your $10 of paper. Hell, if you happen to own one unit Whole Blood on GOG or Steam already, it takes that into account and it lets you upgrade to this one for the remaining $5 fee, which is an even better bang for your buck. But that's really just how I feel, and really it just comes down to personal preference, I guess. Most of the other Bloodites seem to be taking this port unnecessarily negatively. Maybe it's because they play Blood every single day. I don't know. I say, if you're a fan of Blood, get it. If you've never played Blood, get it, play it, because this is by far the best way to experience the game in today's day and age. If you don't like Blood, I don't know what the hell's wrong with you or why you're watching this video, but seriously, this port is worth it. I'm really happy with it, and I really think you should grab it. If you want to play Blood in a 100% true, authentic way, either grab the Blood source port and play it there, or go buy a Windows 98 and a physical copy of Blood and play it on there, because you won't ever be able to top that. But it pleases my soul to say that this port comes really close to that. Thank you for watching.
I think I noticed that was
Hear a little bit of that pack. What the fuck? I don't have any of my guns.
I have this.
Where? Where did it go? It's back here. What? Where?